Okay, guys, sorry I got interrupted in the last episode and decided to just do a second part of episode 3 because I figured it was going to be a little bit longer than some of the other episodes, and this just makes it a lot easier for me. But anyway, getting back into what we were talking about, it is at a basic level, you need drive to get things done in your life, and there's no reason not to be happy. I mean, a happy life where you have energy and things are going your way is better than the opposite. I think we can all agree on that. That was the basic point. It's kind of going in circles there. I apologize for that. I was thinking and fumbling for words. That happens sometimes. But anyway, so now I wanted to get into more of the mechanistic side, or some of the actual tricks and some of the actual tools that I have used to try to identify paths to motivation, whether it's for a day or whether it's for a specific project or whether it's for a specific sort of umbrella goal that I have. We can talk about what those terms mean if you guys are more interested in how I think about this stuff. So I've just got basically a few bullet points here that I'm going to elaborate on. So the first one I put was confront yourself. I think this is really effing important. And what I mean by confront yourself is you have to make a space for deep, sort of a deep inner dialogue to occur, right? You have to make a space for yourself, whether it's a half an hour, whether it's an hour, whether it's 2 hours. I don't care. Take, a day on the weekend to just have a moment of silence, a moment of meditation, a moment of introspection with yourself, and time to ask yourself hard questions. And this is something that's really, really important because, I can tell you that I see a lot of people who are busy and have fallen into the busy trap, and they don't make time to connect with themselves. And I've got to say, you can't connect with any project in the real world or connect with another human being or another creature if you can't actually get in your own head and suss out what you're thinking, right? If you can't even do that, you can't have a conversation, you can't have a deep relationship with another person. You're not going to find your passion unless you confront yourself and unless you ask yourself, what am I interested in? What is my passion? What are my interests? What do I enjoy? What things in my life do I find myself doing on accident? What books do I recommend to people? What books am I, do I find myself reading? What things would I do if I were financially free or didn't have to work? What things would I do in an alternate universe where I was born a multimillionaire, or money would never ever be a problem in my life? Questions like these can be used to identify what you find inherently joyful. And so I was talking a little bit about the motivation hierarchy, and then I kind of got into another point about, I think, why I was doing this podcast and how I'm doing the podcast, about the future of the podcast. And I might actually do a separate, shorter episode for INP number 4, where I do some housekeeping and I talk more about that stuff, because I want to share some of that with you guys and some of the future, but not here. So anyway, that confront yourself is step number 1. The second thing is, and I already kind of said it here, but I think it's really important to meditate. And when I say meditate, I don't just mean, necessarily sit cross-legged on your bed or in a comfortable chair or someplace and silence your mind. Not necessarily that. Certainly that could be how you meditate. But I would say that the important piece of the meditation is mindfulness. And deeper than mindfulness, it is not only present state awareness, but also noticing minor details that arise not only in yourself, because this kind of introspection and self-awareness is really important, but then also that arise in your environment, that are arising around you. And what you'll probably notice, as I have, is that when we're in a state where we're quieting our minds, when we're listening to ourselves and to our bodies, into our environment, that we just notice all these different sounds and sensations and different things happening that we just had absolutely no idea were there until we actually stopped to listen. So it can be really, really powerful just to take even just 5 minutes to just do this. And it doesn't have to be any kind of huge commitment. It doesn't have to be once a day. I mean, of course, and I don't want to be preach or anything like that, but anybody will tell you is that it's like the higher frequency that you do something with, insofar that you don't get burned out and you can recover and things like that, the better, right? If you can meditate 2-3 times a day, you know, for 5 minutes, you should. I think on some level, actually meditating 3 times a day for 3 or 5 minutes is better than meditating once a day or once every other day for 20 minutes. For the simple reason that I think the frequency helps you actually to do the hardest part of the meditation, which is getting in and out of the state, number one. And then also the second thing is, you know, we talk about this in sort of biology, you build that neural pathway faster when you have the higher frequency, especially when it's spaced out sufficiently enough, because you're kind of peaking and suppressing these different hormones, neurotransmitters in your body, and you're getting your body used to switching, like I was saying, not only states mentally, but also states physiologically, in a way that we're not aware of, but in a way that scientists are. And so that's another piece of it. And then, of course, with the meditation, not only can you notice different sensations, but you will be able to slow down in your life and be present and notice when you're feeling joy. Again, that sounds really basic. It sounds almost stupid. Like, of course I know what I'm feeling joy. I'm feeling joy. I'm there. But what I mean is that the point of the present state awareness, and this actually sounds a little bit counterintuitive, but what presence allows you to do is it allows you to detach. And it allows you to really deeply notice something that is arising within yourself, and to really analyze it for a moment, sort of uncritically, and just see what's happening there. And that is generally something that would be called detachment. So what you'll be able to do is you'll be able to notice it, and you'll be calm, and you'll develop, because of meditation, this detached relationship with different ideas rising in your mind. You'll begin to realize that for most of the time, you know, we end up being a passenger who is experiencing the crazy driver that our thoughts can sometimes be. And we are not necessarily the author of our thoughts and feelings in the way that we often think we are. And that by meditation, by slowing down, by being present, we can change our mental state, and we get to decide how we feel. This, of course, can be a controversial point for many people. I mean, like I was saying earlier, I actually imagine that because I've effectively selected for more intellectual and more intelligent people to listen to this, that you guys will understand exactly what I'm talking about when I say things like detachment and talk about the importance of meditation. And I imagine many of you are probably already utilizing some of these different tools, but I'm really just going over them because I think that they are really, really important. And being that I have meditated, and I've done a lot of this stuff actually for many years, but I've done, you know, lots of studying in this area, that, you know, I can tell you that for folks getting started, there are a number of misconceptions that arise with meditation, and I would love to talk about some of them here, but for number one, for the sake of not going on forever, and also just for the reality that there are plenty of better people to talk about this, whether it's Sam Harris or Tara Brach, or, you know, I mean, you name it, some Indian or, you know, just Buddhist guru or something like that. I mean, there's any number of people who you could, you know, go there at. I mean, or you could just do it. I mean, you don't even need an instructor. I mean, sure, it's very easy to use an app like Headspace, and I mean, there are other meditation apps and things like that. Those are actually really useful. I had definitely meditated for many years, actually, since I was a kid, which is really cool, prior to Headspace, but I actually did just try the little Take 10 or whatever. And it was actually really nice, and sort of the instruction, it allows you to direct your attention really effectively, and someone else kind of helping you do that allows you to really easily keep track of what you're trying to focus on. It's kind of like having someone coach you. You know, someone's like, okay, for 30 seconds, I want you to let your brain do whatever it wants. And they're like, okay, now I want you to do, you know, it's kind of like having a coach tell you how many mental push-ups to do, in a sense. And that's how I think about it. You know, meditation is a form of exercise for my detachment muscle and my sort of present state, impartial analysis tool, which I think, you know, you could give that a really cool acronym of a name, but not the point. So anyway, getting in some of the other bullet points here, and I've already talked about these some, but I think that, and of course meditation and presence and mindfulness and things like that come first, and confronting yourself. These are actually kind of in order, which is neat. But it's actually noticing urges. What do you have the urge to do? And I'm not just talking about like the urge to eat ice cream, although that could definitely be one thing. I mean, maybe you just don't. I mean, I'm not necessarily saying that we should eat cookies every day when we have the urge to, necessarily, although that in and of itself is really useful feedback that something's not right with your diet. But again, I don't want to get into that. Not in this podcast, at least, because that is a huge and hard to tackle subject that there's just no good way to talk about quickly without making 30% of any audience mad. So I'm not going to bother with that right now. But the point is that when I say urges, I'm really talking about the instincts and the gut feelings that you get that are not articulated, right? So it's the enteric nervous system, for those of you who are familiar with that. And that was something that I had known about, but I just learned its really, you know, cool sounding name recently from a neuroscientist. That was cool. But I mean, some different people have talked about how the gut is basically another brain in your body, and you know, the idea is, I believe, if I remember correctly, it's not nuclear cells, it's the microbiome that ends up influencing hormones, neurotransmitters, and thoughts, and things like that, that actually makes different decisions, and you have different parts of your nervous system that will give you feedback. But actually getting good at listening to this feedback and utilizing this feedback is actually a really good way to figure out what you need to do more or less of, right? You know, like, do you notice that you're really tense in certain areas, or you're feeling a pain in a particular joint or in your neck? Because that could be a sign that you need to eliminate some food. And again, this is something that I really want to talk about, not in this podcast, because it would probably take me 2 hours. But I mean, there are so many different things. Like, if you eat a food, it makes you feel a certain way, you'll know not to eat that. If you hang out with a person, it makes you feel a certain way, you'll know to do less of that or to approach it differently. If you do an activity and it makes you feel a certain way, you'll know what that means, and so on and so forth. Now, one thing that might be useful for many of you, as it has been for me, is to simply kind of chart down some of this stuff. And again, the misconception that I often hear is that this has to be a long process, but I'm not saying you have to be disciplined and be a Navy SEAL and sit down and write 1,000 words every night about how you feel at this particular moment. It does not have to be an intimidating exercise, you know, that just cripples you and really tests your ability to not get a headache as you make up feelings that you didn't know you had. That's not what I'm getting at here. I mean, literally, you could write 3 sentences about how you feel about something that you did that made you feel a certain way. What I'm suggesting is not meant to be an intimidating process, but rather a way of articulating and storing the feedback that you're getting on the page, right? So you know how you felt at different times. What you can do, I mean, as you are already aware, you can go back and actually look at some of the things that you were seeing and feeling doing certain things. And now what you have is you actually have a, you know, over time, of course, you will have a collection of data that you can use to inform your choices later. Because I think, and this is something else we can talk about in another podcast, is that we learn many lessons in our lives that would prevent us from making many mistakes. The problem is that we just forget so many of them because we're not constantly practicing them and utilizing them. And if we wrote down what we learned every day and just had that stored somewhere and just read it once a month, we could probably avoid 90% of life's disasters, because we'd realize that we were creating these situations in the first place by not listening to the wisdom that we got 5 years ago at a Subway or something. You don't realize that it's there. It's somewhere deep in your brain, but it doesn't help if you can't access it. But anyway, going down this list a little bit more. One second. So, another thing that ends up being... Oh, actually, I keep getting distracted. I'm sorry. I think I was talking about this at the end of the last part. So, to flesh out the motivation hierarchy for you, because it was actually a cool concept, I think I'll just actually link you guys to the article that talked about this, because they are a way cooler person than I am at this moment, and a lot smarter, and can talk about that in a far more useful way. But basically, the motivation hierarchy, like I said, is a pyramid. At the top, you have the implicit motivation and the inherent joy, and then you have, I believe, for reward was the second one. Then you have to please others, and then you have no motivation or no reason. And as one might imagine, it gets more and more persuasive as you move up the list. And not particularly hard to see why. But yeah, I'll just be smart enough to go ahead and link that at in the notes, basically on YouTube, in the description. Okay, so I talked about... Oh, okay. Actually, here's another point. And actually, I don't even have it in my notes. I've pretty much talked about most of what I had planned to talk about. But one other important thing that will probably be the last thing I'll talk about here is this is something that Tim Ferriss talks about. It basically says when you're trying to create a goal for yourself and you're trying to set yourself up for success, basically, and actually he puts it a hell of a lot better than I do, but basically he has this this mnemonic. I was trying to remember the word there, guys. Bear with me. That is DISSS. The I is silent. It's just there to help you remember the word. So you have deconstruction, you have selection, sequencing, and stakes. And the stakes are not like, cow steaks, the really delicious things that you always order medium rare at the restaurants that you like. No, but actual reasons or sort of consequences for not fulfilling your goals. So this could be betting money against yourself on a public forum online, and they have a number of different sites that you can just Google for this. Mostly because I am failing to remember the exact names of some of these sites, but I'm sure many of you know what I'm talking about. A quick Google search will help you find that. But basically, utilizing incentives and understanding. You talk about drive. That is kind of the inherent joy. But when you think about the reward, which is the second point, that can be really powerful too. And I think what's important here is if you stack them and if you layer these together, if you do something that you already really enjoy, but then you say, oh, well, I know I should do this, but instead I want to go do something else. That's fine. I'm not saying that makes you a bad person. But if you know you have a deadline, or even if you don't, or it's just for whatever reason you decide that you want to do something more quickly, you can stack doing it for reward and then add an incentive, either a positive incentive or a negative consequence for not fulfilling it, whatever works better for you, to help to motivate yourself towards that. So a lot of different strategies for using that. I'm sure that there are many I missed here, and actually, and this brings me to another thing I hopefully will talk about in the next episode, but I want this to be a conversation. I want these podcasts to not be me just, and of course they won't always be monologues. In the future, I hope to actually get people on here and have conversations with them, and do different things like that, because hell, that's part of what you're supposed to do in a podcast, because I want to be able to, for my own reasons, learn as much as I can, and then on the flip side, share that with you guys. So if you are feeling a little bit generous today, or you want to join us in the conversation, please tell me in the comments what tips and things like that I've missed, or what tips you guys use to motivate yourselves, because that'll really help me out, so we can help each other out here. Little win-win situation. Never hurt anybody. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge, say no more. So I hope what I went over in this two-part episode of Intellectuals Paradise podcast was helpful for you guys. So anyway, thank you guys for listening. This is Orion Webster signing off. Hope you guys have a great day.